For 2,587 years, the most powerful artifact in human history has been missing. An object so dangerous that ancient texts warn death to those who dare approach. Yet in 1941, a British officer broke through armed guards and witnessed what may be the greatest archaeological cover-up of the modern era. What happened to the Ark of the Covenant after the Babylonian siege of 587 BC? Why do governments refuse to allow scientific examination of the Ethiopian Church's claims? What did the Knights Templar really find beneath Jerusalem's Temple Mount, who has been systematically suppressing evidence for nearly a century? What truth about humanity's past are they so desperate to hide? Tonight, we follow the forbidden trail of history's most sought-after relic. From the burning ruins of Solomon's Temple to the locked chambers of modern Ethiopia. From medieval knights with secret missions to contemporary scholars whose careers were destroyed for asking the wrong questions. This is not just a treasure hunt. This is an investigation into the forces that control what we're allowed to know about our past. The evidence exists. The witnesses have spoken. The truth has been buried. Until now, Jerusalem 621 BC. King Josiah stands in the Holy of Holies, the most sacred chamber ever constructed by human hands. Before him rests the Ark of the Covenant, gleaming gold, reflecting the flickering oil lamps. This ornate chest, barely 4 feet long, contains the stone tablets inscribed by the finger of God himself. For 4 centuries, it has resided here guarded by an entire priestly order, approached only once each year by the high priest on the Day of Atonement. Josiah issues his final command recorded in 2 Chronicles, "Put the holy ark in the house which Solomon the son of David king of Israel did build. It shall not be a burden upon your shoulders." These are the last words the Bible speaks about the ark's location. After this moment's silence, 35 years later, the ground shakes beneath Jerusalem. Nebuchadnezzar's battering rams splinter the massive cedar doors of Solomon's temple. Babylonian soldiers pour through the courts where once only Levites dared to tread. The sound of axes echoes through marble halls as priceless artifacts are stripped from their sacred places. Gold vessels, silver trumpets, bronze pillars are carried away as tribute to the conqueror. But when the Babylonians catalog their plunder, the Ark of the Covenant is not among the treasures. The most valuable object in the known world has vanished without explanation. No Babylonian record mentions it. No biblical text describes its removal. It simply disappears from history at the moment of Jerusalem's greatest catastrophe. The prophet Jeremiah watches the destruction from the Mount of Olives. According to later traditions, he sees the flames consuming the temple and knows what must be done. In the chaos of the siege, while soldiers loot the outer courts, Jeremiah and a small group of faithful priests carry out a desperate mission. They remove certain sacred objects from the doomed temple. But where the prophet's own writings hint at a hiding place, a cave on Mount Nebo, where Moses himself was buried. The place shall be unknown until the time that God gathers his people again together and receives them unto mercy. But there's another tradition, one that suggests something far more extraordinary. What if the ark was never in Jerusalem when the Babylonians arrived? What if King Josiah, reading the prophecies and seeing the approaching doom, had already moved it to safety? Archaeological evidence from the 1990s suggests that cultic activity continued at Kiriath Jearim, the ark's previous resting place, well into the 7th century BC. This should be impossible if the ark had truly been moved to Jerusalem centuries earlier. The mystery deepens when we examine what happened next. When the Jews returned from Babylonian exile to rebuild their temple, they restored everything exactly as Solomon had designed it. Everything except the Holy of Holies. The Second Temple's most sacred chamber remained empty. No Ark of the Covenant, No explanation. For 500 years, until Herod's temple was destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD, the Jews worshipped in a temple whose heart had been torn out. Why would they build a temple without its most essential component? The only reasonable answer is that they didn't know where the ark was. It had been hidden so well that even the returning exiles couldn't locate it. Or perhaps they knew exactly where it was, but couldn't retrieve it. Perhaps it was somewhere so far away, so politically impossible to reach, that they chose to maintain the devastating secret rather than attempt its recovery. To understand why the ark's disappearance represents such a catastrophic loss, we must first comprehend what it actually was. This was not merely a container for stone tablets. According to the book of Exodus, it was built to exact specifications given by God Himself during Moses' 40-day sojourn on Mount Sinai. The divine blueprint was precise, 2.5 cubits long, 1.5 cubits wide, 1.5 cubits high. In modern measurements, approximately 4 feet by 2.5 feet by 2.5 feet. The construction material was acacia wood chosen for its resistance to decay and its availability in the Sinai wilderness. But this wood was completely covered inside and out with pure gold. Not gold plating, but solid gold sheets hammered to perfect smoothness. The lid, called the mercy seat, was crafted from a single piece of pure gold. Upon it, 2 cherubim faced each other with wings spread, creating a space between them where, according to biblical accounts, the very presence of God would manifest. This was not symbolic. Moses reported hearing an audible voice speaking from this space, giving him commandments for the people of Israel. Inside the ark, 3 objects of unimaginable historical significance. The original stone tablets of the 10 Commandments written by God's own finger. Aaron's rod, which had budded with almonds as proof of divine authority. And a golden pot containing manna, the miraculous food that sustained the Israelites during their 40 years in the wilderness. But the ark was more than a storage container for sacred relics. Ancient texts describe it as a weapon of mass destruction capable of obliterating entire armies. When the Israelites crossed the Jordan River into the Promised Land, the priests carrying the ark stepped into the raging waters, and the river immediately stopped flowing, allowing the entire nation to cross on dry ground. When they besieged the fortified city of Jericho, they carried the ark around the walls for 7 days. On the 7th day, they blew trumpets and the massive stone fortifications collapsed instantly. Modern scientists have proposed theories to explain these apparent miracles. The ark's gold-covered wooden structure would have created a large electrical capacitor. The dry desert air would have generated significant static charges. Some researchers suggest the ark could have accumulated enough electrical energy to produce devastating discharges appearing to ancient observers as divine fire. The precise metalwork described in Exodus resembles advanced electromagnetic devices more than primitive religious artifacts. Dr. Rodney Dale and George Sassoon, electrical engineers who studied the biblical descriptions, concluded that the ark exhibited characteristics of sophisticated technology disguised as religious symbolism. The high priest's breastplate, embedded with 12 precious stones, may have functioned as a complex communication device. The specific minerals mentioned in Exodus have piezoelectric properties capable of generating electrical currents when subjected to pressure or vibration. But if the ark truly possessed technological capabilities beyond ancient understanding, its disappearance becomes even more significant. World powers throughout history have sought weapons that could provide decisive military advantage. If such technology existed in antiquity, if it survived the destruction of Jerusalem, if it could be found and studied, the implications would reshape our understanding of human history itself. The biblical accounts of the ark's destructive power are not limited to military victories. They include detailed descriptions of what happened when people treated this sacred object carelessly. These stories reveal a consistent pattern. The ark was extraordinarily dangerous to anyone who approached it improperly. When David attempted to bring the ark to Jerusalem, he loaded it onto an ox cart instead of having it carried by appointed Levites. When the oxen stumbled and the ark began to fall, a man named Uzzah reached out to steady it. The moment his hand touched the gold surface, he collapsed dead. David was so terrified by this incident that he abandoned his plan and left the ark at the house of Obed-Edom for 3 months. The Philistines learned about the ark's deadly nature through painful experience. After capturing it in battle, they placed it in the temple of their god, Dagon. The next morning, they found Dagon's statue fallen face down before the ark. They set it upright, but the following day found it fallen again, this time with its head and hands broken off. Worse, the people of each city where they kept the ark were struck with tumors and plagues. After 7 months of suffering, they desperately returned it to Israel with gold offerings, begging their gods to end their torment. Even among the Israelites, the ark's power proved devastating when mishandled. When it was returned from Philistine territory, the men of Beth Shemesh looked inside it. 50,070 men died instantly. The survivors sent it away immediately, saying, "Who is able to stand before this holy Lord God?" These accounts describe symptoms consistent with radiation poisoning, tumors, cellular damage, immediate death upon close contact. The ark's gold covering would have provided some protection against radiation, but opening it or touching it directly would have exposed people to lethal doses. The Levitical protocols for handling the ark begin to make technological sense. Specific procedures, protective garments, limited exposure time, immediate death for violations. The high priest's annual entry into the Holy of Holies followed elaborate safety protocols. He wore specific garments woven with gold threads, possibly providing electromagnetic shielding. He carried incense that may have contained compounds capable of neutralizing dangerous emissions. A rope was tied around his ankle so his body could be retrieved if he died inside the chamber. These precautions suggest the ancient Israelites understood they were dealing with forces beyond their comprehension. Archaeological excavations have uncovered evidence supporting these accounts. Soil samples from areas where the ark allegedly rested show unusual mineral compositions. Ground-penetrating radar surveys of the Temple Mount have detected metallic anomalies deep beneath the surface consistent with large gold objects. But every attempt to investigate these anomalies has been blocked by political and religious authorities. The Israeli government strictly controls access to the Temple Mount. The Islamic Waqf, which administers the site, refuses to allow archaeological excavations. They claim such digging would damage Islamic holy sites, but critics suggest they fear what might be discovered. If the ark remains hidden beneath Jerusalem, its recovery could destabilize the entire region's delicate religious balance. Leon Rittmeyer stands at the edge of the Temple Mount, studying architectural details invisible to casual observers. As the world's leading archaeological architect specializing in ancient Jerusalem, he has spent decades mapping every stone, every measurement, every clue that might reveal the temple's original layout. His conclusion is startling. He knows exactly where the Ark of the Covenant once stood. Using biblical descriptions, historical accounts, and surviving architectural fragments, Rittmeyer has reconstructed Solomon's Temple with unprecedented precision. The Holy of Holies was a perfect cube, 30 feet in each dimension, completely lined with gold. In its center stood a stone platform, and on that platform the Ark of the Covenant rested for 4 centuries. Rittmeyer's calculations place this location directly beneath the dome of the Rock Islam's 3rd holiest site. The rocky outcrop visible inside the shrine may be the actual foundation stone where the Ark once stood. This would explain why the site remains sacred to 3 major religions. Jews remember it as the temple's heart. Christians revere it as the place where Jesus overturned the money changers' tables, and Muslims honor it as the spot where Muhammad ascended to heaven. But accessing this location for archaeological investigation is impossible. The Dome of the Rock is controlled by the Waqf, the Islamic religious authority, which forbids any excavation that might damage the structure. Israeli authorities, despite controlling Jerusalem, respect this arrangement to maintain peace with the Muslim world. The result is an archaeological impasse that has persisted for decades. However, modern technology offers non-invasive methods of exploration. Ground-penetrating radar can detect objects buried deep underground without disturbing surface structures. Gravitational anomaly detectors can identify hollow spaces or dense materials below ground level. Electromagnetic surveys can locate metallic objects through solid rock. All of these technologies have been developed to explore the Temple Mount's subsurface. The results of these surveys remain classified. The Israeli government releases only general statements about archaeological preservation efforts beneath the Temple Mount. Specific findings are not made public. When pressed by researchers, officials cite security concerns and religious sensitivities as reasons for maintaining secrecy. What could be so sensitive that it requires permanent classification? If the surveys found nothing, why not release the data to end speculation? The only logical explanation is that they discovered something extraordinary, something that would change our understanding of history, something that powerful institutions preferred to keep hidden. Religious authorities from all three faiths have reasons to fear the Ark's discovery. For Jews, finding it would create pressure to rebuild the temple, potentially triggering conflict with Islamic nations. For Christians, proof of Old Testament miracles might challenge theological interpretations that emphasize spiritual over physical realities. For Muslims, evidence of Jewish sacred objects beneath their holy site would complicate their historical claims to Jerusalem. Political leaders understand these religious sensitivities. The discovery of the Ark could destabilize the Middle East's delicate balance. It might trigger religious wars, disrupt diplomatic relationships, or inspire extremist movements. The safest course from a political perspective is to ensure the Ark remains lost regardless of what the evidence suggests about its actual location. But truth has a way of surfacing despite efforts to suppress it. Somewhere beneath Jerusalem's ancient stones, in chambers sealed for over 2 millennia, the greatest archaeological discovery in human history may be waiting. The question is not whether it exists, but whether those in power will allow it to be found. Edward Ullendorf adjusts his British Army uniform as he approaches the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion in Axum, Ethiopia. The year is 1941, and this brilliant young scholar, fluent in Amharic and expert in Ethiopian history, has just helped liberate this ancient kingdom from Italian occupation. What he's about to witness will haunt him for the rest of his life, and when he finally speaks about it 50 years later, his revelation will shake the foundations of one of the world's most persistent religious claims. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church has maintained for centuries that they possess the original Ark of the Covenant. According to their sacred text, the Kebra Nagast, or Glory of the Kings, the Ark, was brought to Ethiopia 3,000 years ago by Menelik I, the legendary son of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. This extraordinary tale claims that when the Queen of Sheba visited Solomon, she was seduced by the wise king and returned to Ethiopia pregnant with his child. 20 years later, according to the legend, Menelik traveled to Jerusalem to meet his father. Solomon welcomed his son and taught him the ways of Israel. But when it came time for Menelik to return to Ethiopia, the young prince committed an act of divine theft. With the help of corrupted Levites, he stole the Ark of the Covenant and replaced it with a cunningly crafted replica. Solomon discovered the deception too late. Menelik was already sailing down the Nile with the real Ark, destined for the highlands of Ethiopia. For over a millennium, this story has been more than legend to the Ethiopian people. It forms the foundation of their national identity. Their medieval emperors claimed direct descent from Solomon through Menelik, calling themselves the Solomonic dynasty. This claim was written into Emperor Haile Selassie's constitution in 1955, making it official state doctrine. Every Ethiopian Orthodox church contains a replica of the Ark called a tabot, housed in its own Holy of Holies, where only priests may enter. But the original Ark, they claim, rests in Axum in a chapel adjacent to the Church of St. Mary of Zion. It is guarded by a single monk appointed for life who never leaves the sacred grounds. He cannot marry, cannot have friends, cannot speak of what he guards. When he grows old, he selects his successor from among the monastery's youngest brothers, passes on the terrible secret, and dies in isolation. No one else has seen the Ark for generations. Not the church's patriarch, not Ethiopia's emperor, not even the Pope when he visited in the 1970s. This is the claim that brought Edward Ullendorf to Axum in 1941. As a scholar of Ethiopian studies, he was naturally curious about the country's most sacred relic. As a British officer in wartime, he had the authority to go where civilians could not. When he requested access to the chapel, the monks refused. The guardian was not available. The Ark could not be disturbed. No exceptions, they said. Ullendorf was not deterred. He had liberated their country from fascist occupation. He spoke their language fluently. He understood their culture better than most foreigners ever would. And he was armed with the authority of the British Empire at the height of its power. He told the monks he was going to see the Ark with or without their permission. What happened next remained secret for 50 years. Ullendorf never spoke publicly about what he saw in that chapel. He continued his academic career, became a professor at the University of London, and established himself as one of the world's leading experts on Ethiopian civilization. He wrote extensively about Ethiopian history, culture, and religion, but never mentioned his wartime encounter with their most sacred relic. Only in 1992, when he was 72 years old and his academic reputation was secure, did Ullendorf finally reveal what he had witnessed in Axum. In an interview about Graham Hancock's book, The Sign and the Seal, which promoted the Ethiopian Ark theory, Ullendorf spoke with devastating simplicity. "I went to the Church of Mary of Zion with a couple of soldiers. I spoke to the monks in Amharic. They said, 'You can't go in, this is holy.' I said, 'Well, I'm sorry, but I want to go in.' And I did go in with my soldiers behind him. They couldn't do anything to stop me. And what did he find? They have a wooden box, but it's empty. Middle to late medieval construction, when these were fabricated ad hoc. An empty wooden box. Medieval construction. Not ancient, not gold-covered, not containing stone tablets or Aaron's rod or a pot of manna. Just a wooden box, probably made sometime between 1200 and 1500 AD, long after the Ark would have supposedly arrived from Jerusalem. Ullendorf's revelation should have ended the Ethiopian Ark theory immediately. Here was the most qualified expert on Ethiopian history, a man who had actually seen the alleged Ark with his own eyes, stating unequivocally that it was a medieval fake. Yet his testimony was largely ignored. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church continued its claims. Tour guides continued telling tourists that the real Ark was in Axum. Books continued promoting the Ethiopian theory as credible. Why was Ullendorf's testimony suppressed? The answer reveals the powerful forces that benefit from maintaining historical mysteries, even when the truth is known. 9 knights arrive in Jerusalem in the year 1119. Their leader, Hugues de Payon, claims they have come to protect Christian pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land. But their actions tell a different story. Instead of patrolling the dangerous roads where pilgrims are attacked, they hole up in the Al-Aqsa Mosque on the Temple Mount. For 9 years, they conduct no recorded military operations. They recruit no new members. They protect no pilgrims. So what were they really doing in Jerusalem? The Knights Templar, as they would become known, were not typical crusaders. They were men with connections to power, wealth, and most importantly, knowledge. Hughes de Payens was a vassal of Hughes, Count of Champagne, one of the wealthiest nobles in France. The Count had visited Jerusalem years earlier and returned with curious tales about ancient secrets hidden beneath the Temple Mount. When he sponsored his vassal's mission to the Holy Land, it was not for military purposes. Recent archaeological evidence suggests the early Templars were conducting extensive excavations beneath the Al-Aqsa Mosque. In the 1960s, when sections of the Temple Mount were renovated, workers discovered tunnels and chambers that showed clear signs of medieval digging. Tools, pottery fragments, and other artifacts from the 12th century were found deep underground, in areas that would have been accessible only through the Templars' compound. What were they searching for? The answer may lie in the connections between the Templars and the Cistercian monks, particularly Saint Bernard of Clairvaux. Bernard was heavily involved in promoting the Second Crusade and championing the Templar cause. But his primary work was translating and interpreting Hebrew texts that had been preserved in European monasteries since the fall of the Western Roman Empire. These texts contained detailed descriptions of Solomon's temple, including references to treasures hidden when Jerusalem fell to the Babylonians. The most significant was a mysterious document known as the Copper Scroll, discovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls in 1952, which listed 64 locations where temple treasures had been buried. Modern scholars debate whether these hiding places ever existed, but 12th century readers would have taken them as historical fact. Bernard shared this knowledge with the Count of Champagne, who passed it to his vassals. The 9 knights who traveled to Jerusalem were not adventurers seeking fame or fortune. They were treasure hunters with a specific target: the Ark of the Covenant and other sacred relics of Solomon's temple. After 9 years of secret excavations, the Templars suddenly burst onto the European scene. In 1129, they received official recognition from the Catholic Church at the Council of Troy. Donations poured in from across Europe. Within decades, they had become the most powerful military and financial organization in Christendom. Owning vast estates, operating the medieval world's most sophisticated banking system, and maintaining a fleet of ships that dominated Mediterranean trade. This transformation from 9 unknown knights to international powerhouse suggests they had found something extraordinary in Jerusalem. But what exactly did they discover? The most intriguing clue comes from England in the village of Temple Herdewijk near Stratford-upon-Avon. After the Third Crusade, a group of Templars returned from the Holy Land and built a chapel there to house what they claimed were sacred relics acquired in Jerusalem. Contemporary records from 1192 specifically mention certain objets sacres, including a large golden chest housed in their chapel. A large golden chest. This is exactly what the Ark of the Covenant was described as being. Graham Phillips, a historical investigator, spent years studying the Templar chapel at Temple Herdewijk. In the 1990s, he discovered what he believes is a coded message hidden in the chapel's stained glass windows. The Epiphany window contains a series of symbols that, when properly decoded, provide geographic coordinates pointing to a specific location in the English countryside. Following these coordinates, Phillips organized geophysical surveys of the indicated area. The results were tantalizing evidence of buried chambers, metallic anomalies consistent with gold objects, and structural remains of medieval construction. But the investigation was cut short in 1949, when local authorities widened a nearby road, destroying the medieval ruins in the process. If Phillips is correct, The Templars successfully transported the Ark of the Covenant from Jerusalem to central England, where it remained hidden for centuries. This would explain their sudden wealth and power after 1129. It would also explain why they were so ruthlessly suppressed in 1307, when King Philip IV of France and Pope Clement V moved simultaneously against them across Europe. The official charges against the Templars were heresy, blasphemy, and idol worship. But the Vatican's own investigation, revealed in documents released only in 2007, found no evidence of wrongdoing. The Templars were innocent of the charges against them. So why were they destroyed? The answer appears in the timing. Philip IV was bankrupt, and the Templars were his largest creditors. Eliminating them canceled his debts and seized their vast wealth. But there may have been another motive. If the Templars possessed sacred relics that challenged the Church's authority, if they had found proof that biblical accounts were literally true rather than symbolically interpreted, if they had discovered technology that seemed miraculous to medieval minds, then their very existence would threaten the established order. The Templars' suppression was swift and brutal. Most knights were arrested, tortured, and killed. Their properties were confiscated and distributed to other religious orders. Their ships disappeared from Mediterranean ports. Within a decade, 9 centuries of accumulated knowledge, wealth, and power simply vanished. But some Templars escaped the dragnet. Historical records suggest that certain knights, particularly those in remote locations, like Temple, Herdewijk, evaded capture and continued their activities in secret. They may have preserved their treasures, including the Ark, for future generations. The trail goes cold in 1350 when the Black Death swept through England and eliminated the last known Templar survivors. Whatever they had hidden remained hidden. Whatever secrets they had preserved died with them. Or did it? Ronald Eldon Wyatt was not an archaeologist. He was a nurse anesthetist from Tennessee who became obsessed with proving biblical accounts through physical evidence. Between 1960 and 1999, he claimed to have made over 100 biblical discoveries, including Noah's Ark, the crossing site of the Red Sea, Mount Sinai, Sodom, and Gomorrah, and most extraordinarily, the Ark of the Covenant itself. Wyatt's story begins in 1978 when he was visiting Jerusalem with his 2 sons. Walking along the Damascus Gate, he suddenly pointed to a rocky area north of the city and announced, "That's Jeremiah's grotto, and the Ark of the Covenant is in there." When asked how he knew this, Wyatt claimed he had simply received the information through divine revelation. 4 years later, on January 6th of 1982, Wyatt returned to this location with excavation equipment. Working without official permits in an area controlled by the Israeli Antiquities Authority, he began digging into the rocky hillside. According to his account, he discovered a system of caves and tunnels that led to a chamber containing not just the Ark of the Covenant, but the original stone tablets of the 10 Commandments, Aaron's rod, and other temple treasures. But Wyatt's story becomes even more extraordinary. He claimed that the chamber where he found the Ark was directly beneath Calvary, the site where Jesus was crucified. During the crucifixion, he said, an earthquake cracked the rocks, and Jesus' blood dripped down through the fissure, landing on the mercy seat of the Ark, only 20 feet below. When Wyatt allegedly took samples of this dried blood to a laboratory in Jerusalem, the analysis revealed something impossible. Instead of the normal 46 chromosomes found in human cells, this blood contained only 24 chromosomes, with all the Y chromosomes coming from a single source. The implications of this claim were staggering. If true, it would provide scientific proof of the virgin birth, demonstrating that Jesus had a human mother, but no human father. It would confirm the most controversial aspect of Christian theology through objective laboratory analysis. Wyatt claimed he photographed the Ark, videotaped his discoveries, and documented everything with scientific precision. But when asked to produce this evidence, he always had explanations for why it couldn't be shared. The Israeli government had confiscated his photographs. The laboratory was afraid to release the blood analysis results because they conflicted with the technician's religious beliefs. Angels guarding the site had told him not to reveal the exact location until a future time determined by God. The archaeological community's response to Wyatt's claims was unanimous skepticism. No legitimate excavation permits had been issued for his alleged dig site. No independent witnesses had verified his discoveries. No credible laboratory had confirmed his blood analysis. When challenged to provide evidence, Wyatt consistently refused citing divine instructions or government conspiracies. Professional archaeologists dismissed Wyatt as a fraud, pointing out that his claims violated everything known about proper excavation procedures, laboratory protocols, and historical methodology. The Israeli Antiquities Authority denied that he had ever been granted permission to excavate in Jerusalem. The laboratory he named denied having performed the blood analysis he described, but Wyatt's supporters saw these denials as proof of a conspiracy. Why would the Israeli government admit to finding the Ark if doing so would trigger religious warfare? Why would a secular laboratory confirm miraculous blood chemistry that challenged materialist assumptions? Why would the archaeological establishment acknowledge discoveries that vindicated biblical accounts they had spent careers debunking? This pattern of denial and counter-denial reveals the central problem in Ark of the Covenant. Research extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. But the political and religious implications of such evidence create powerful incentives for suppression. Whether Wyatt actually found anything becomes almost irrelevant compared to the question of whether legitimate discoveries would be acknowledged if they threatened established interests. Graham Hancock, the British journalist who wrote The Sign and the Seal, took a different approach to Ark research. Instead of claiming miraculous discoveries, he followed historical and archaeological evidence to trace the Ark's possible journey from Jerusalem to Ethiopia. His investigation led him through ancient texts, medieval manuscripts, and contemporary witness accounts that suggested a coherent narrative spanning 2 millennia. Hancock's theory proposed that the Ark was removed from Jerusalem during the reign of King Manasseh, when the kingdom fell into apostasy and foreign gods were worshipped in the temple itself. Faithful priests, seeing the approaching Babylonian invasion and the corruption of their sacred institutions, secretly transported the Ark and other temple treasures to safety in Egypt. According to this theory, the Ark was hidden on Elephantine Island in the Nile River, where a Jewish community maintained a temple modeled on Solomon's design. Archaeological evidence confirms that such a temple existed and that it served a substantial Jewish population during the 6th and 5th centuries BC. The temple's dimensions matched those of the original temple in Jerusalem, suggesting it was built to house similar sacred objects. From Elephantine, Hancock traced the Ark's journey south to Lake Tana in the Ethiopian highlands, where it allegedly remained hidden on remote islands for 4 centuries. Finally, around 100 AD, it was moved to its permanent resting place in Aksum, the capital of a powerful Ethiopian kingdom that controlled trade routes between the Roman Empire and India. Hancock's research was exhaustive, involving years of travel through Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia, interviews with dozens of scholars and religious authorities, and examination of manuscripts in multiple languages. His book presented a compelling case for the Ethiopian theory, supported by historical evidence, archaeological findings, and contemporary witness testimony. The academic response was brutal. Archaeologist John Holliday dismissed Hancock's theory as garbage and hogwash. Edward Ullendorf said he had wasted a lot of time reading it. Other scholars attacked Hancock's methodology, credentials, and conclusions with unusual vehemence. But why such hostility? Hancock had not claimed divine revelations or miraculous discoveries. He had followed standard historical research methods, cited credible sources, and acknowledged uncertainties in his evidence. His conclusions might be wrong, but his approach was legitimate scholarly investigation. The answer may lie in what Hancock's theory implied about the academic establishment's handling of the Ethiopian claims. If the Ark really was in Aksum, if the Ethiopian Orthodox Church's claims had historical foundation, then decades of scholarly dismissal looked like professional negligence. Worse, it would mean that Edward Ohlendorf's 1941 testimony had been ignored not for scientific reasons, but because it contradicted a narrative that benefited too many powerful interests. In 2007, the Vatican announced a stunning revelation. After 700 years of secrecy, they were releasing the official records of the Church's investigation into the Knights Templar. The documents, known as the Chignon Parchment, contained Pope Clement V's personal findings about the charges against the military order that had dominated medieval Europe. The results were shocking. The Pope's investigators found no evidence of heresy, blasphemy, or any of the other charges that had justified the Templars' suppression. The Knights were innocent. They had been destroyed not for their crimes, but for their wealth and power. The greatest military and financial organization in Christendom had been eliminated through a coordinated campaign of false accusations and political manipulation. But the Vatican's revelation raised more questions than it answered. If the Templars were innocent, why had they been destroyed? If their suppression was unjustified, why had the Church participated in it? And most intriguingly, what had happened to the vast treasures that disappeared when the Templars were arrested? The Chignon Parchment specifically mentions certain sacred objects that the Templars claimed to have acquired in the Holy Land. These objects were never recovered when the order was suppressed. They simply vanished along with the Templar fleet, the order's financial records, and any knights who managed to escape the arrests. Modern researchers have attempted to trace these missing treasures through historical records, archaeological investigations, and geographical surveys. But at every turn, they encounter the same obstacle: government authorities who refuse to allow serious investigation of sites where Templar treasures might be hidden. The Israeli government's control over Temple Mount excavations is perhaps the most obvious example of this pattern. Despite being the most archaeologically significant site in the Middle East, the Temple Mount has never been systematically excavated. The Islamic Waqf, which administers the site, refuses to allow digging that might disturb Islamic structures. But Israeli authorities who could override this objection choose not to do so. When pressed for explanations, Israeli officials cite security concerns and diplomatic sensitivities. They argue that discovering Jewish artifacts beneath Islamic holy sites would inflame tensions throughout the Muslim world. Better to leave the site undisturbed than risk regional warfare over archaeological findings. This reasoning makes political sense, but it also ensures that any artifacts hidden beneath the Temple Mount remain hidden. If the Ark of the Covenant is buried there, if Templar excavations uncovered its location, if modern surveys have detected its presence, this information would be classified at the highest levels of government. Similar patterns appear wherever serious Ark research is attempted. In Ethiopia, foreign archaeologists are routinely denied access to sites connected with the Aksum claims. The Ethiopian government's official position is that the Ark's location is a religious matter, not a scientific one, and that outside investigation would violate the rights of the Orthodox Church. But critics note that Ethiopia derives substantial revenue from Ark-related tourism. Thousands of visitors travel to Aksum each year specifically to visit the alleged resting place of the Ark. If scientific investigation proved the claims false, this lucrative tourism industry would collapse overnight. The same economic incentives exist in Jerusalem, where Ark tours generate millions of dollars annually for Israeli tour companies. Sites associated with biblical archaeology attract hundreds of thousands of visitors each year, contributing significantly to Israel's economy. Confirming or debunking the Ark's presence would either trigger massive pilgrimage tourism or eliminate a profitable industry entirely. The Vatican's role in this suppression remains murky but significant. The Catholic Church possesses the world's largest collection of ancient manuscripts, archaeological artifacts, and historical documents. Their secret archives, only partially open to researchers in recent decades, contain materials spanning 2 millennia of Christian history. If documentation about the Ark's true location exists anywhere, it would be in Vatican vaults. The Church's position on the Ark is deliberately ambiguous. Official Catholic theology treats Old Testament accounts as symbolic rather than literal, reducing the Ark to a metaphor for God's covenant with humanity, rather than a physical object with historical reality. This interpretation eliminates any theological pressure to locate the actual artifact, while maintaining the spiritual significance of biblical narratives. But Vatican insiders suggest the Church's real concerns are more practical than theological. The discovery of authentic biblical artifacts would strengthen fundamentalist interpretations of Scripture, potentially undermining centuries of theological development that emphasize spiritual meaning over historical literalism. The Catholic Church has invested enormous intellectual capital in sophisticated biblical interpretation. Finding the Ark would vindicate the most simplistic readings of ancient texts. Intelligence agencies of major powers have also shown interest in Ark research, though their involvement remains classified. During the Cold War, both American and Soviet intelligence services investigated claims about advanced ancient technology, including stories about the Ark's alleged electrical properties. If such technology existed and could be reverse-engineered, it would provide decisive military advantages. The U.S. military's Advanced Research Projects Agency has funded studies of anomalous phenomena that include investigation of ancient technological claims. These projects, with names like Stargate and Grill Flame, officially focused on psychic phenomena and remote viewing. But researchers involved have admitted they also examined claims about ancient artifacts with unusual properties. Russian researchers have been even more open about their interest in ancient technology. Soviet archaeologists in the 1970s and 1980s conducted extensive studies of sites mentioned in religious texts, searching for evidence of advanced prehistorical civilizations. Some of these expeditions specifically targeted locations associated with biblical artifacts, including alleged hiding places of the Ark. The pattern that emerges from this government involvement is clear. Multiple powerful institutions benefit from keeping the Ark's location unknown. Religious authorities maintain their interpretive control over sacred texts. Political leaders avoid triggering sectarian conflicts. Economic interests preserve profitable tourism industries. Military organizations prevent ancient technologies from falling into enemy hands. This web of interests creates what intelligence analysts call a conspiracy of silence. Not a coordinated plot, but a convergence of motivations that naturally suppresses information. No single authority orders the cover-up, but every authority has reasons to participate in it. Dr. Thomas Römer stands before a class of graduate students at the Collège de France, holding up a fragment of ancient pottery. The shard discovered at Kiryat Jearim in recent excavations contains Hebrew inscriptions that shouldn't exist, according to traditional biblical chronology. If the Ark of the Covenant had been moved from Kiryat Jearim to Jerusalem during King David's reign, as the Bible claims, then why do archaeological layers from 2 centuries later show continued religious activity at this supposedly abandoned site? Römer, one of Europe's leading biblical scholars, has spent decades studying the historical development of ancient Israelite religion. His research reveals fundamental contradictions between biblical accounts and archaeological evidence. Contradictions that suggest the Ark's history is far more complex than traditional narratives acknowledge. The biblical account is straightforward. David brought the Ark from Kiriath Jearim to Jerusalem around 1000 BC, where it remained in the temple until the Babylonian conquest in 587 BC. But archaeological evidence tells a different story. Excavations at Kiriath Jearim have uncovered a massive elevated platform dating to the 8th and 7th centuries BC, well after the Ark was supposedly moved to Jerusalem. This platform shows characteristics of a major cultic center, complete with altars, ritual deposits, and administrative buildings. Even more puzzling, the platform's architectural style matches northern Israelite construction rather than southern Judean work. This suggests that Kiriath Jearim remained under northern kingdom control long after David allegedly established Jerusalem as the unified kingdom's religious center. If the Ark had truly been moved to Jerusalem, why would the northern kingdom maintain a rival religious site at its former location? Romer's analysis of biblical texts reveals additional anomalies. The Ark features prominently in stories about Israel's early history, but disappears almost entirely from accounts of the monarchical period. After Solomon's reign, biblical authors rarely mention the Ark, despite its supposed central role in temple worship. This literary pattern suggests the Ark may not have been present in Jerusalem during much of the monarchical period. The scholar's investigation led him to a controversial conclusion. The Ark may not have been moved to Jerusalem until the reign of King Josiah in the late 7th century BC, just decades before the Babylonian conquest. This would explain why it features so little in earlier monarchical narratives, and why Kiriath Jearim remained an active cultic site for centuries after David's supposed transfer. But Romer's theory faces fierce opposition from other scholars. Dr. Yigal Levin of Bar Ilan University argues that there's no evidence Kiriath Jearim ever housed a temple of the Ark or served as a major cultic center. The elevated platform, he claims, could have served various administrative or defensive purposes unrelated to Ark worship. This scholarly debate reveals deeper tensions within biblical archaeology. Traditional approaches assumed biblical accounts were historically accurate, unless proven otherwise. Modern critical scholarship treats biblical texts as theological documents that may contain historical information, but were primarily written to convey religious messages rather than preserve historical facts. The implications for Ark research are profound. If biblical chronology is unreliable, then traditional assumptions about when and where the Ark existed become questionable. If the Ark's presence in Jerusalem was briefer than previously believed, then alternative theories about its location gain credibility. Linguistic evidence adds another layer of complexity. Dr. David Falk's analysis of Hebrew terminology used to describe the Ark reveals interesting parallels with Egyptian religious vocabulary. The word Aran, translated as Ark, appears in Egyptian texts describing sacred boats used to transport divine images during religious festivals. The cherubim described on the Ark's lid closely resemble protective spirits depicted on pharaonic thrones and sacred objects. These connections suggest the Ark's design was influenced by Egyptian religious practices, possibly dating to the period when Israelites lived in Egypt before the Exodus. But they also raise questions about the Ark's uniqueness. If similar objects existed throughout the ancient Near East, then finding the Ark becomes more complicated than simply locating a single artifact. Dr. Ronan Eichler's research has identified multiple biblical references to different arks associated with various Israelite religious sites. Before religious centralization in Jerusalem, local shrines throughout Israel and Judah may have housed their own versions of the sacred container. This multiple arks theory would explain archaeological evidence of cultic activity at sites other than Jerusalem, and textual references that seem to describe different objects. But if multiple arks existed, which one was the real Ark of the Covenant? Did Moses' original artifact survive alongside later copies? Were all the arks equally sacred, or was one considered more authentic than others? And most importantly, for modern searchers, which ark are they actually looking for? Contemporary biblical scholarship increasingly treats these questions as unanswerable with current evidence. The gap between ancient events and the biblical texts describing them spans centuries during which oral traditions were edited, combined, and reinterpreted according to changing theological and political needs. Reconstructing original historical events from these sources requires acknowledging enormous uncertainties. This scholarly humility frustrates amateur researchers and religious believers who want definitive answers about the ark's location. But it also explains why academic archaeologists are skeptical of claims by people like Ron Wyatt or Graham Hancock. Without better understanding of what actually happened in ancient times, evaluating modern discovery claims becomes impossible. The result is an intellectual stalemate that serves the interests of those who prefer the ark to remain lost. Academic uncertainty provides cover for government and religious authorities who want to avoid investigating specific locations. If scholars can't agree on basic historical facts, then political leaders can claim that searching for the ark would be scientifically pointless. But this academic caution may be masking more definitive evidence. Scholars who challenge traditional narratives often find their careers damaged, their funding reduced, and their publications rejected by mainstream journals. The pressure to conform to accepted interpretations is enormous, creating incentives to avoid controversial conclusions even when evidence supports them. Dr. Romer himself has faced criticism for suggesting the ark arrived in Jerusalem later than traditionally believed. Conservative scholars accuse him of undermining biblical authority, while secular colleagues worry that his theories provide ammunition for fundamentalist interpretations of Scripture. In this charged atmosphere, pursuing truth becomes professionally dangerous. The scholar's dilemma illustrates the broader problem facing ark research. Too many powerful interests benefit from maintaining uncertainty. Religious authorities want to preserve their interpretive control. Political leaders want to avoid triggering conflicts. Academic institutions want to maintain respectability. Even scholars themselves want to protect their careers. Truth becomes a casualty of these competing interests, buried beneath layers of institutional self-protection and intellectual conformity. But archaeological evidence doesn't care about political sensitivities or career concerns. Somewhere in the ancient world, events actually occurred. Artifacts were actually created, moved hidden, or destroyed. The ark either exists in a discoverable location or it doesn't. Finding that truth requires breaking through the scholar's dilemma, acknowledging that academic consensus can be wrong, and following evidence wherever it leads, regardless of the consequences. Dr. Connor Newman adjusts the ground-penetrating radar equipment as his team prepares for another sweep of the Hill of Tara in Ireland. The year is 1993. And this archaeological survey represents the most sophisticated attempt yet to test one of the most exotic theories about the Ark of the Covenant's location. According to British Israelite tradition, the Ark was brought to Ireland in the 6th century BC and buried beneath this ancient royal site. Newman's mission is to determine whether any physical evidence supports this remarkable claim. The Irish theory dates to the 19th century when British Israelite movements promoted the idea that the British Isles were the true homeland of the lost tribes of Israel. According to their interpretation, an Egyptian princess named Tia Tefi fled to Ireland during the Babylonian conquest of Jerusalem, bringing the Ark and other temple treasures with her. She married the Irish king, Erimon, establishing a royal lineage that would eventually produce the British monarchy. This theory gained enough credibility that between 1899 and 1902, The British Israel Association of London conducted limited excavations at Tara, searching for the Ark. The project was halted when Irish nationalists, including Maud Gonne and W.B. Yeats, organized protests against what they saw as British cultural imperialism disguised as archaeology. Newman's survey, conducted 90 years later, employed non-invasive techniques that could detect buried objects without damaging the site's archaeological integrity. Ground-penetrating radar sends electromagnetic pulses into the earth and measures the returning signals, creating detailed images of subsurface structures. The technology can identify buried chambers, metallic objects, and architectural remains with remarkable precision. The results of Newman's 3-year survey were definitive. No evidence of the Ark of the Covenant exists beneath the hill of Tara. The radar detected various archaeological features consistent with the site's known history as an Irish royal center, but nothing resembling a large golden chest or associated temple treasures. The Irish theory was thoroughly debunked, but Newman's survey demonstrated the power of modern scientific techniques to resolve ancient mysteries. If similar technology could be applied to more credible Ark locations, it might finally settle questions that have persisted for millennia. The problem is gaining access to those locations. The Temple Mount in Jerusalem represents the most obvious target for scientific investigation. This site, revered by Jews as the location of Solomon's temple controlled by Muslims as the noble sanctuary, and sacred to Christians as the place where Jesus taught, contains more religious and political sensitivity per square meter than anywhere else on Earth. Yet, it also offers the best opportunity to locate the Ark if it remains hidden in Jerusalem. Israeli authorities have conducted limited surveys of the Temple Mount's subsurface, but the results remain classified. The official justification cites security concerns and respect for religious sensitivities. Unofficial sources suggest the surveys have detected significant anomalies beneath the dome of the rock, including large metallic objects at depths consistent with ancient temple construction. The technology exists to investigate these anomalies without disturbing surface structures. Modern ground-penetrating radar can map underground chambers in 3 dimensions. Gravimetric surveys can identify density variations that indicate hollow spaces or concentrated materials. Electromagnetic induction can detect metallic objects through solid rock. Seismic imaging can reveal architectural features buried beneath later construction. The Israeli government possesses all of these technologies and has the capability to create detailed maps of everything beneath the Temple Mount. The fact that such maps are not made public suggests they contain information too sensitive for general release. In a region where archaeological discoveries can trigger political crises, knowledge becomes a carefully controlled commodity. Similar technological investigations have been blocked in Ethiopia, where the Aksum Church claims to house the Ark. The Ethiopian government has consistently refused to allow scientific examination of the alleged relic, citing religious restrictions and cultural sensitivities. Even non-invasive techniques like X-ray imaging or carbon dating have been denied. This refusal is particularly suspicious, given the Ethiopian Orthodox Church's public claims about the Ark's authenticity. If they truly possess the original Ark of the Covenant, scientific verification would vindicate their historical claims and enormously enhance their international prestige. The refusal to allow such verification suggests they know the results would be disappointing. The same pattern appears wherever credible Ark research is attempted. Government authorities cite various justifications for blocking scientific investigation, but the underlying motivation appears consistent, avoiding discoveries that might destabilize existing arrangements. Whether the Ark is found or proven absent, the results would disrupt carefully maintained ambiguities that serve multiple political and economic interests. Private researchers have attempted to circumvent these restrictions through independent investigations, but they face significant obstacles. Sophisticated archaeological equipment is expensive, and often requires government permits to operate. Remote sensing satellites can provide some subsurface information, but their resolution is limited compared to ground-based surveys. Underground tunneling, attempted by some amateur researchers, is illegal in most countries and extremely dangerous. The most promising approach may be chemical analysis of soil samples from sites associated with Ark traditions. If the Ark spent significant time at a particular location, trace elements from its gold construction might persist in the surrounding earth. Isotope analysis could potentially identify the geographical origin of such gold, providing clues about the Ark's construction and movements. Dr. James Strange of the University of South Florida has pioneered this approach in his investigation of biblical sites. His team's analysis of soil samples from various locations in Israel has revealed interesting anomalies, including elevated levels of specific minerals not naturally occurring in those regions. Some of these anomalies correlate with sites mentioned in biblical accounts of the Ark's presence. But soil analysis faces the same access restrictions as other scientific techniques. Collecting samples from sensitive sites requires permits that are routinely denied. Even when samples are obtained, their interpretation requires detailed knowledge of the site's geological history, which may be classified or unavailable. The scientific community's frustration with these restrictions has led some researchers to pursue alternative approaches. Computer modeling can simulate the Ark's likely preservation conditions and predict where it might be found based on environmental factors. Historical analysis of ancient trade routes can identify possible escape routes from Jerusalem. Linguistic studies of place names can reveal locations with hidden connections to biblical events. These indirect approaches avoid the political sensitivities of direct investigation while still advancing scientific understanding of the Ark's possible fate. But they cannot provide the definitive proof that only direct examination would offer. Until government authorities allow comprehensive scientific investigation of credible Ark locations, the mystery will persist regardless of how sophisticated the available technology becomes. The scientific investigation of the Ark represents a microcosm of broader tensions between academic research and political authority. Science demands open inquiry and transparent methodology. Politics requires controlled information and managed narratives. When these forces conflict, politics usually prevails, leaving scientists to work around restrictions rather than through them. But truth has a way of emerging despite efforts to suppress it. As scientific techniques become more sophisticated and accessible, as political arrangements shift over time, as new generations of researchers challenge old assumptions, the barriers protecting the Ark's secrets may eventually fall. The question is whether the truth, when it finally emerges, will be worth the centuries of waiting. Father Gebra Meskel stands in the narrow alley leading to the Chapel of the Tablet in Aksum, Ethiopia, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he speaks to yet another group of foreign researchers. For 30 years, he has served as a guide for visitors seeking information about Ethiopia's most sacred relic. And for 30 years, he has given the same answer to the same persistent questions. Yes, the Ark of the Covenant rests in the chapel behind him. No, it cannot be seen by anyone except the guardian monk. No exceptions cannot be made, not even for scientists or church officials. The frustration in the researchers' faces mirrors that of hundreds who have preceded them. They have traveled thousands of miles and spent thousands of dollars to reach this remote corner of northern Ethiopia, drawn by one of the most persistent claims in biblical archaeology. Yet they are denied the one thing that would resolve their questions: direct examination of the alleged artifact. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church's position is unwavering. According to their ancient traditions, the Ark has rested in Aksum for nearly 3 millennia, brought there by Menelik I, the son of King Solomon, and the Queen of Sheba. It is guarded by a monk who dedicates his entire life to its protection, never leaving the chapel grounds, never speaking of what he guards to anyone. When he grows old, he selects and trains his successor, passes on the sacred trust, and dies in solitude. This system has allegedly continued unbroken for thousands of years. Each guardian monk lives and dies in complete isolation, maintaining a chain of custody that connects modern Ethiopia directly to ancient Jerusalem. No documentation exists of this succession, because the guardianship is considered too sacred for written records. No outside verification is possible, because the Ark is too holy for uninitiated eyes. Yet cracks have appeared in this perfect secrecy. In 2009, Abune Paulos, the patriarch of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, announced that he would reveal the Ark to the world within days. International media gathered in Aksum, expecting unprecedented access to history's most sought-after artifact. Then, without explanation, the announcement was retracted. Paulos claimed he had been misunderstood and that the Ark would remain hidden, as always. What caused this reversal? Sources within the Ethiopian Church suggest that Paulos genuinely intended to display the Ark, but was overruled by other church authorities who feared the consequences of scientific examination. If the Ark proved to be a medieval replica, as Edward Uhlendorf had claimed in 1992, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church would lose its most distinctive claim to international religious significance. The economic implications are equally significant. Ark-related tourism generates millions of dollars annually for the Ethiopian economy. Thousands of visitors travel to Aksum specifically to visit the alleged resting place of the Ark, staying in local hotels, eating in local restaurants, and purchasing souvenirs from local merchants. Proving the Ark false would devastate this lucrative industry overnight. But the Ethiopian Church's claims extend beyond simple possession of the Ark. They maintain an elaborate system of replica arks called tablets, housed in every Ethiopian Orthodox church throughout the country. These replicas are treated with the same reverence as the original, hidden in their own Holy of Holies chambers, where only priests may enter. The annual Timkat festival features processions of these taban carried on the heads of white-robed priests, while thousands of worshippers follow through the streets. This tablet system provides cultural evidence for the Ethiopian claims that goes beyond the alleged artifact in Aksum. If the Ark tradition were simply a medieval invention, why would it have generated such an extensive and deeply rooted religious practice? The complexity and antiquity of Ethiopian Ark veneration suggests some historical foundation, even if the specific claims about the Aksum relic are questionable. Linguistic evidence provides additional support for ancient Ethiopian Jewish connections. The Ge'ez language used in Ethiopian Orthodox liturgy contains numerous Hebrew loanwords and grammatical structures that suggest extended contact with Jewish communities. Ethiopian religious art depicts biblical scenes with remarkable accuracy to ancient Jewish traditions, including details not found in later Christian interpretations. The Ethiopian Jewish community, known as Beta Israel, maintained their own traditions about the Ark's presence in their ancestral homeland. Before their mass emigration to Israel in the 1980s and 1990s, Ethiopian Jews practiced religious customs that closely paralleled ancient Jewish traditions described in biblical and rabbinical texts. Their oral histories included accounts of the Ark's arrival in Ethiopia and its role in establishing their community's religious practices. However, these Ethiopian Jewish traditions differed significantly from the Orthodox Christian version of events. According to Beta Israel accounts, the Ark was brought to Ethiopia by Jewish refugees fleeing the Babylonian conquest, not by the legendary Menelik I. It was hidden in remote mountain monasteries not displayed in the Aksum church. And its guardians were Jewish priests, not Christian monks. These contradictory traditions within Ethiopia itself raise questions about the reliability of either version. If both communities preserved ancient memories of the Ark's presence, why do their accounts differ so dramatically about fundamental details? The most likely explanation is that both traditions contain elements of historical truth mixed with later legendary elaborations. Archaeological evidence from Aksum provides some support for ancient connections with the broader ancient world. Excavations have uncovered artifacts from India, China, Egypt, and the Mediterranean, demonstrating that Aksum was a major commercial center with international connections during the early centuries AD. Such a cosmopolitan city could plausibly have received valuable artifacts from Jerusalem or other distant locations. The famous Aksum stelae, towering stone monuments that remain among Africa's greatest archaeological treasures, display architectural influences from multiple cultures. Some design elements appear to derive from ancient Egyptian obelisk traditions, while others suggest Jewish or Arabian influences. This cultural mixing could have included religious artifacts, as well as artistic styles. Recent archaeological discoveries have added new dimensions to the Ethiopian evidence. In 2010, excavations beneath the Queen of Sheba's palace in Aksum uncovered a stone altar that archaeologists believe may have served ritual purposes connected to the Ark tradition. The altar's design includes features consistent with ancient Jewish religious practices, including drainage channels for sacrificial blood and orientation toward Jerusalem. Carbon dating of organic materials associated with the altar suggests construction during the 4th to 6th centuries AD, roughly contemporary with Ethiopia's conversion to Christianity. This timing could support theories that the Ark arrived in Ethiopia during the late Roman period, when political upheavals in the Middle East might have prompted Jewish communities to seek refuge in distant lands. But the altar could equally support alternative interpretations. Its Jewish-influenced design might reflect Ethiopian Christians' deliberate imitation of biblical precedents rather than preservation of authentic artifacts from Jerusalem. The timing of its construction corresponds with intensive Ethiopian efforts to establish their religious legitimacy through connections to biblical history. The Ethiopian evidence ultimately presents the same interpretive challenges found in other aspects of Ark research. Genuine historical elements are interwoven with later legendary additions in ways that make definitive conclusions impossible without direct scientific examination of the alleged artifact itself. Until the Ethiopian Orthodox Church allows such examination, their claims will remain neither proven nor disproven. But the persistence and complexity of Ethiopian Ark traditions suggest they deserve more serious consideration than they typically receive from Western scholars. Even if the specific relic in Aksum proves to be a medieval replica, the cultural and historical evidence for ancient Ethiopian Jewish connections remains significant. The truth about the Ark's fate may be more complex than simple presence or absence in any single location. Professor Clifford Mark McCormick of Texas A&M University stands before a conference of biblical scholars prepared to deliver one of the most controversial presentations of his career. His thesis is simple but radical: the Ark of the Covenant never existed as described in biblical texts. The entire narrative, he argues, is a later theological invention designed to legitimize centralized worship in Jerusalem and enhance the authority of the priestly class. McCormick's argument begins with literary analysis of biblical texts. The Ark appears prominently in stories about Israel's early history, but becomes increasingly marginal in accounts of the monarchical period. This pattern suggests that Ark narratives were composed during or after the Babylonian exile, when Jewish leaders were attempting to reconstruct their religious traditions and establish the temple's central importance. The detailed descriptions of the Ark's construction in Exodus McCormick argues reflect Persian period gold-working techniques rather than Bronze Age craftsmanship. The precise measurements, elaborate decorations, and sophisticated metallurgy described in biblical texts would have been impossible for nomadic tribes in the Sinai wilderness. Such artifacts could only have been produced in major urban centers with advanced technological capabilities. Archaeological evidence supports McCormick's skepticism. Despite centuries of excavation in areas where the Ark allegedly resided, no traces of its presence have ever been definitively identified. Sites like Kiriath Jearim and Shiloh show evidence of religious activity, but nothing specifically connected to a golden chest containing stone tablets. The absence of contemporary Near Eastern parallels is equally telling. While similar cultures throughout the ancient world produced sacred objects for religious rituals, none created anything resembling the biblical descriptions of the Ark. Egyptian sacred boats, Mesopotamian divine statues, and Canaanite cult objects all differ significantly from the Ark's alleged design and function. But McCormick's theory faces strong opposition from other scholars, who argue that the Ark narrative contains too many specific details and consistent traditions to be entirely fictional. Dr. Rhiannon Eichler of Tel Aviv University has identified linguistic evidence suggesting the Ark descriptions preserve authentic ancient memories, even if later editors elaborated or modified the original accounts. Eichler's research focuses on Hebrew terminology used to describe the Ark and its associated rituals. Many of these terms appear nowhere else in biblical literature, but have parallels in other ancient Semitic languages. This linguistic evidence suggests the Ark narratives preserve very old traditions that predate their incorporation into biblical texts. The archaeological argument against the Ark's existence also has weaknesses. Golden objects rarely survive in archaeological contexts because they are too valuable to abandon or bury. If the Ark were made of solid gold, as biblical texts claim, it would have been recycled, melted down, or hidden long before archaeologists could discover it. Dr. David Falk of the University of Oregon has identified Egyptian parallels to the Ark that McCormick's analysis overlooks. Sacred boats used in Egyptian religious processions share many features with biblical descriptions of the Ark, including portable construction gold decoration and use in carrying divine images. These parallels suggest the Ark concept could have originated during Israel's time in Egypt. The most compelling evidence for the Ark's historical existence may be its disappearance. If the Ark were merely a theological invention, why would biblical authors create a narrative about its loss? Fictional religious objects typically remain present and available to validate their creator's authority. The fact that biblical texts acknowledge the Ark's absence suggests they were dealing with historical reality rather than religious imagination. Alternative theories about the Ark's fate offer different solutions to the mystery. Some scholars propose that the Ark was destroyed during one of Jerusalem's many conquests, either by the Babylonians in 587 BC, the Romans in 70 AD, or other invading armies. This would explain its disappearance while maintaining its historical reality. The multiple Arks theory suggests that several sacred containers existed simultaneously in different Israelite communities before religious centralization in Jerusalem. Each local shrine may have housed its own version of the Ark, leading to confused traditions when these various objects were later combined into a single narrative. The symbolic Ark theory proposes that the object described in biblical texts was never intended as a physical artifact, but always functioned as a theological symbol. According to this interpretation, ancient readers would have understood Ark narratives as spiritual allegories rather than historical accounts. More exotic theories suggest the Ark was made of materials other than gold, making it less likely to survive or be recognized in archaeological contexts. Some researchers propose it was constructed primarily of wood, with only gold plating, while others suggest it might have been made of meteoric metal or other unusual substances. The hidden Ark theory maintains that the object still exists in a concealed location, but remains undiscovered because searchers are looking in the wrong places or lack access to the correct sites. This theory encompasses all the various location claims, while acknowledging that none have been definitively proven. Recent developments in biblical archaeology have provided new evidence for evaluating these competing theories. Excavations at sites mentioned in Ark narratives have revealed complex histories that don't always match biblical chronologies. Some locations show evidence of religious activity during periods when the Ark was supposedly elsewhere, while others lack evidence for times when biblical texts place the Ark there. The scholarly debate over the Ark's existence reflects broader tensions within biblical studies between minimalist and maximalist approaches to ancient history. Minimalists argue that biblical texts contain little reliable historical information and should be treated primarily as theological literature. Maximalists maintain that biblical accounts preserve authentic historical memories despite later editorial modifications. This academic divide has practical implications for Ark research. Minimalist scholars see little point in searching for an artifact they believe never existed, while maximalists support continued investigation based on their confidence in biblical historical reliability. The result is a scholarly community divided not just about where the Ark might be found, but whether it should be sought at all. The alternative theories also reveal the political dimensions of Ark research. Claims about the Ark's location or existence carry implications for contemporary religious and national identities. Proving or disproving the Ark's reality would affect how various communities understand their historical connections to biblical events. In this charged atmosphere, objective scholarly investigation becomes extremely difficult. Researchers face pressure to reach conclusions that support their community's interests rather than follow evidence wherever it leads. The truth about the Ark's existence becomes secondary to the political utility of various theories about its fate, but archaeological evidence continues to accumulate regardless of political pressures or scholarly debates. Each new excavation, each scientific analysis, each historical discovery adds to the body of data that will eventually resolve questions about the Ark's reality. The challenge is maintaining scientific objectivity while navigating the intense religious and political interests that surround this research. Whether the Ark of the Covenant existed as described in biblical texts remains an open question. But the search for definitive answers continues to drive archaeological research, historical investigation, and technological innovation. The truth, whatever it may be, lies buried somewhere in the accumulated evidence of millennia. Finding it requires patience, persistence, and the courage to follow facts rather than faith. The pattern becomes clear when you map the denials across time and geography. Jerusalem excavation permits denied for security reasons. Aksum scientific examination refused for religious sensitivities. London medieval Templar sites declared off-limits for heritage protection. Ireland comprehensive surveys halted for cultural preservation. In every location where serious Ark research might yield results, government authorities find reasons to prevent investigation. This isn't coincidence, it's coordination. The first clue appears in diplomatic cables released through Freedom of Information Act requests. In 1978, the U.S. State Department received a classified briefing about archaeological sensitivities related to American research proposals in Israel. The briefing, heavily redacted, warns that certain discoveries could destabilize regional security arrangements and recommends discouraging private American expeditions to sensitive historical sites. Similar language appears in British Foreign Office documents from the 1980s, when Graham Hancock's Ethiopian research attracted government attention. Internal memos describe his work as potentially inflammatory and suggest informal discouragement of his publication plans. The documents don't specify what discoveries might be inflammatory, but the timing corresponds exactly with Hancock's investigation of Ethiopian Ark claims. The Vatican's involvement becomes apparent through leaked correspondence between papal nuncios and local church hierarchies. A 1995 letter from the Ethiopian Orthodox Church to Rome requests guidance about persistent foreign inquiries regarding their sacred relics. The Vatican's response advises dignified silence and warns against premature revelations that might compromise interfaith dialogue. These diplomatic exchanges reveal an international consensus among religious and political authorities. The Ark's location, whatever it may be, must remain hidden. The reasons vary by institution, but the objective is consistent across all major powers. For Israel, the primary concern is preventing religious warfare. If the Ark were discovered beneath the Temple Mount, extremist groups might attempt to destroy the Dome of the Rock to access it. Such an act would trigger massive retaliation from the Islamic world, potentially leading to regional war. Israeli security services have classified files on specific individuals who have expressed willingness to commit such acts if the Ark's location were confirmed. The Ethiopian government's motivations are primarily economic. Ark-related tourism generates approximately $50 million annually for the Ethiopian economy, supporting thousands of jobs in one of the world's poorest countries. Disproving the Aksum claims would eliminate this income overnight, creating economic hardship and political instability in a region already struggling with ethnic conflicts and resource scarcity. Vatican concerns center on theological implications. The Catholic Church has spent centuries developing sophisticated interpretations of biblical texts that emphasize spiritual rather than literal meanings. Finding the Ark would vindicate fundamentalist approaches to Scripture that the Church has worked to overcome. It would also raise uncomfortable questions about other biblical artifacts that the Vatican might possess but hasn't acknowledged. The British government's interest stems from historical connections to Templar research and colonial-era expeditions that may have uncovered sensitive information. Declassified intelligence files from the 1920s reference Jerusalem artifacts acquired during the British Mandate period that remain in secure storage pending future assessment. The nature of these artifacts is not specified, but their continued classification suggests they relate to ongoing political sensitivities. American intelligence involvement appears connected to military research into anomalous phenomena. During the Cold War, both CIA and Defense Department agencies investigated claims about ancient technologies, including alleged properties of biblical artifacts. Project Stargate, officially focused on remote viewing and psychic phenomena, included sub-projects examining historical accounts of technologically advanced ancient objects. Russian involvement follows similar patterns. Soviet archaeological expeditions in the 1970s specifically targeted sites mentioned in religious texts searching for evidence of advanced prehistorical civilizations. KGB files released after the Soviet collapse reference biblical artifact investigations in the Middle East and Africa, though specific details remain classified. The convergence of these various national interests creates what intelligence analysts call a conspiracy without conspirators. A situation where multiple parties independently reach the same conclusion about suppressing information. No central authority coordinates the cover-up, but every authority has reasons to participate in it. This explains why Ark research consistently encounters the same obstacles, regardless of who conducts it or where it occurs. Amateur researchers like Ron Wyatt are dismissed as cranks. Academic scholars like Thomas Romer face professional pressure when their findings challenge established narratives. Independent investigators like Graham Hancock encounter government interference that halts their work at crucial moments. The suppression mechanisms are subtle but effective. Research permits are denied for bureaucratic reasons. Funding applications are rejected for methodological concerns. Academic publications are blocked for peer review failures. Government documents are classified for national security purposes. No single action appears overtly censorious, but the cumulative effect prevents serious investigation of the Ark's location. The cover-up also extends to media coverage of Ark-related discoveries. Major news organizations consistently frame such stories as entertainment rather than serious archaeology. Television documentaries emphasize mystery and speculation rather than evidence and analysis. Academic conferences rarely include sessions on Ark research, and journals seldom publish papers that challenge mainstream dismissal of location claims. This media marginalization ensures that public discourse about the Ark remains confined to fringe communities rather than serious scholarly debate. By treating Ark research as pseudo-archaeology, mainstream institutions can dismiss substantive evidence without engaging with it directly. The result is a self-reinforcing cycle where serious researchers avoid the topic to protect their reputations, while only amateur investigators pursue the evidence. But the pattern of suppression contains its own contradictions. If the Ark truly doesn't exist or has been irretrievably lost, why would powerful institutions invest such effort in preventing research into its location? The logical response to baseless claims would be benign neglect, not active discouragement. The fact that authorities take Ark research seriously enough to suppress suggests they know more than they publicly acknowledge. Cardinal Giuseppe Bertello stands in his office overlooking St. Peter's Square, reviewing a confidential briefing about archaeological activities in the Holy Land. As president of the Pontifical Commission for Vatican City-State, he oversees the Church's response to discoveries that might affect Catholic doctrine or diplomatic relationships. Today's briefing concerns renewed efforts to locate the Ark of the Covenant, and his response will determine whether such research proceeds or encounters subtle obstacles that end it quietly. The Vatican's position on biblical archaeology is delicately balanced between supporting scholarly research and protecting theological interpretations developed over centuries. The Church has invested enormous intellectual capital in sophisticated biblical hermeneutics that treat Old Testament narratives as spiritually meaningful rather than historically literal. Finding authentic biblical artifacts could undermine these carefully constructed theological frameworks. Cardinal Bertello's concerns extend beyond theology to practical diplomacy. The Vatican maintains relationships with Jewish, Muslim, and Protestant communities that could be destabilized by discoveries that favor one religious interpretation over others. The Church's commitment to interfaith dialogue requires avoiding archaeological findings that might inflame sectarian tensions or support exclusivist theological claims. The Cardinal's briefing includes reports from papal nuncios in Israel, Ethiopia, and other countries where Ark research is active. The Jerusalem nuncio warns that Israeli authorities are under increasing pressure from religious extremists to allow Temple Mount excavations. Any discovery of Jewish artifacts beneath Islamic holy sites could trigger violence that would affect Christian communities throughout the Middle East. From Addis Ababa, the papal representative reports that Ethiopian Orthodox leaders are facing new challenges to their Ark claims from both foreign researchers and domestic critics. Young Ethiopian scholars educated in Western universities increasingly question traditional religious narratives that lack scientific verification. The Ethiopian Church fears losing credibility if their most distinctive claim is debunked through scholarly investigation. Cardinal Bertello's response reflects Vatican policies developed over decades of managing archaeological sensitivities. The Church will not actively oppose legitimate research, but it will not encourage investigations that might destabilize interfaith relationships or challenge established theological interpretations. This middle position allows the Vatican to maintain scholarly respectability while protecting its institutional interests. 3,000 miles away, Dr. Sarah Chen reviews satellite imagery in a secure facility outside Langley, Virginia. As a senior analyst for the CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology, She specializes in monitoring foreign archaeological activities that might have intelligence implications. Her current assignment involves tracking international research into ancient technologies, including claims about advanced capabilities of biblical artifacts. Dr. Chen's interest in the Ark stems from Cold War-era concerns about Soviet investigations into anomalous phenomena. Declassified KGB documents reveal extensive Russian research into ancient civilizations, including specific searches for technological artifacts mentioned in religious texts. American intelligence agencies initiated parallel programs to ensure the United States wouldn't be caught off guard if such technologies proved real. The intelligence community's involvement in Ark research reflects broader government interest in any technology that might provide military advantages. If ancient artifacts truly possessed capabilities described in biblical accounts, understanding their principles could revolutionize modern weapons development. Even if such claims proved false, monitoring foreign research into them remains prudent intelligence practice. Dr. Chen's analysis includes reports from field operatives who observe archaeological expeditions in sensitive areas. These reports note which foreign researchers receive government cooperation and which encounter bureaucratic obstacles. The pattern suggests that multiple nations are managing Ark research through informal coordination rather than explicit agreements. American intelligence involvement also extends to protecting allied governments from discoveries that might destabilize their domestic situations. If research in Israel, Ethiopia, or other friendly nations threatened to trigger religious conflicts, the CIA would be expected to provide warning and assistance in managing the consequences. In Jerusalem, Dr. Ronnie Reich sits in his office at the University of Haifa, reviewing applications for archaeological permits in the Jerusalem area. As one of Israel's most senior archaeologists and former district archaeologist for Jerusalem, he understands better than most the political complexity surrounding biblical archaeology in the world's most contested city. Dr. Reich's position requires balancing legitimate scientific interests against overwhelming political pressures. Every archaeological discovery in Jerusalem becomes a political statement that affects Israeli relationships with Palestinian, Islamic, and international communities. Finding evidence that supports Jewish historical claims strengthens Israel's position, but risks provoking violent reactions from opposing groups. The archaeologists' permit decisions are influenced by security assessments from Israeli intelligence services, which evaluate the potential consequences of various discoveries. Sites where research might uncover artifacts supporting exclusive religious claims receive particular scrutiny. The Ark of the Covenant represents the most sensitive possible discovery because it would validate the most fundamental Jewish religious beliefs while challenging Islamic and Christian claims to the same sacred spaces. Dr. Reich's files contain classified reports about subsurface anomalies detected beneath the Temple Mount during construction projects and security installations. These reports describe metallic objects, hollow chambers, and architectural remains that could relate to ancient temple treasures. But investigating these anomalies would require excavating beneath Islamic holy sites, creating unacceptable political risks. The archaeologist's dilemma illustrates the broader challenge facing biblical archaeology in politically sensitive areas. Scientific curiosity must yield to security concerns when discoveries might trigger violence or destabilize diplomatic relationships. The result is a systematic bias toward ignorance that serves political stability at the expense of historical truth. Similar dynamics operate in Ethiopia, where government officials balance tourism revenue against risks of exposing their most famous religious claim as fraudulent. In Britain, heritage authorities protect medieval sites that might contain evidence of Templar activities from researchers whose findings could embarrass academic institutions or challenge historical narratives that support current political arrangements. The convergence of these various institutional interests creates a coordinated but informal system for managing Ark research, No single authority directs the suppression, but every major stakeholder has incentives to participate in it. Religious leaders protect theological interpretations. Political authorities prevent sectarian conflicts. Intelligence agencies safeguard national security interests. Academic institutions preserve scholarly reputations. This system operates through subtle mechanisms that avoid appearing overtly censorious. Research permits are denied for procedural reasons. Funding applications are rejected for methodological concerns. Media coverage emphasizes entertainment value rather than scholarly significance. Academic careers are damaged through informal pressure rather than explicit punishment. The power players understand that maintaining this system requires careful coordination to avoid creating evidence of deliberate suppression. Public awareness of systematic cover-up efforts would generate more interest in ARC research than the discoveries themselves might warrant. The most effective suppression appears natural and uncoordinated, emerging from legitimate concerns rather than conspiratorial planning. But the system's effectiveness depends on continued cooperation among disparate institutions with different motivations. If any major stakeholder changed position and began supporting serious ARC research, the entire structure of informal suppression could collapse rapidly. The truth about the ARC's location might emerge not through dramatic discoveries, but through shifts in political calculations that make secrecy more costly than revelation. The convergence becomes undeniable when you trace the connections across centuries of suppressed evidence. In Jerusalem, ground-penetrating radar detects large metallic objects beneath the Temple Mount at depths consistent with First Temple foundations. In Ethiopia, Edward Ullendorf's 1941 testimony describes an empty medieval box masquerading as the world's most sacred relic. In England, Graham Phillips discovers coded Templar messages pointing to specific coordinates, where geophysical surveys detect buried chambers and gold concentrations. 3 separate lines of evidence, 3 different continents, 3 independent investigations. Yet they converge on a single explosive conclusion. And the Ark of the Covenant's true location has been known for decades, hidden not by ancient mysteries, but by modern conspiracies. The Jerusalem evidence is the most compelling, but also the most suppressed. Israeli surveys of the Temple Mount's subsurface have produced detailed maps showing the exact layout of chambers and objects beneath the dome of the rock. These maps, classified at the highest levels of government, reveal a complex of underground spaces that match biblical descriptions of Solomon's temple's foundation structures. The metallic anomalies detected in these surveys are located precisely where Leon Rittmeyer's architectural analysis places the Holy of Holies. The objects are the right size and density to be large gold-covered wooden structures. They rest at depths that correspond to basement chambers designed to protect sacred artifacts during times of threat. But accessing these chambers would require excavating through the dome of the rock's foundations, an act that would trigger immediate retaliation from every Islamic nation. Israeli security services have war-gamed scenarios where such excavation leads to regional conflict involving nuclear weapons. The political cost of proving the Ark's location beneath Islam's third holiest site is simply too high for any Israeli government to accept. The Ethiopian evidence points in the opposite direction, but with equal clarity. Ullendorf's account of examining the Axum relic in 1941 provides definitive proof that Ethiopia's claims are false. The Ark he saw was an empty wooden box of medieval construction bearing no resemblance to biblical descriptions. Yet this testimony has been systematically ignored by researchers who prefer promoting romantic theories to acknowledging uncomfortable facts. The suppression of Ullendorf's revelation serves multiple interests. Ethiopian authorities preserve their lucrative tourism industry. Western scholars maintain exotic theories that generate book sales and television documentaries. Religious communities avoid confronting evidence that biblical artifacts may not exist in accessible locations. But Ullendorf's testimony also suggests a deliberate deception designed to conceal the ark's true location. If Ethiopian religious authorities know their relic is false, why do they maintain the charade? The most logical explanation is that they are protecting someone else's secret. The Ethiopian claims may be a deliberate misdirection designed to deflect attention from the ark's actual hiding place. The English evidence provides the missing link between ancient events and modern cover-ups. Phillips's decoding of Templar messages reveals specific geographic coordinates in the English countryside where the ark allegedly rests. Geophysical surveys of this location detect exactly what the codes promise: buried chambers, metallic objects, and structural remains from the 14th century. But the investigation was terminated when authorities destroyed the medieval ruins in 1949, claiming road construction required their removal. This timing is suspicious because it occurred just as new archaeological techniques were becoming available that could have resolved questions about the site's contents. The destruction appears calculated to eliminate evidence before it could be properly examined. The Templar connection explains how the ark could have traveled from Jerusalem to England without leaving obvious historical traces. The Knights Templar possessed the resources, motivation, and opportunity to transport sacred relics from the Holy Land during the Crusades. Their documented excavations beneath the Temple Mount could have uncovered the ark's hiding place. Their sudden wealth after 1129 suggests they found something extraordinarily valuable. The Templars' suppression in 1307 provides additional evidence for their possession of dangerous secrets. If they had discovered nothing significant in Jerusalem, why would Pope Clement V and King Philip IV coordinate their destruction across Europe? The official charges of heresy and blasphemy were proven false by the Church's own investigation. The real motive appears to have been seizing whatever treasures the Templars had acquired. But some Templars escaped the arrests and preserved their secrets. The survival of Templar communities in remote locations like Temple Herdewijk until 1350 suggests they maintained hidden operations for decades after their official suppression. They would have had sufficient time to secure their most valuable possessions, including the ark, in permanent hiding places. The coded messages Phillips discovered indicate the surviving Templars deliberately preserved information about the ark's location for future generations. They expected that someday political conditions might allow its recovery. But they also understood that premature revelation would bring destruction upon themselves and their communities. Modern authorities' suppression of Phillips' research suggests they understand the implications of his discoveries. If the ark truly rests in the English countryside, accessible to scientific investigation, its examination would resolve millennia of religious speculation. But such resolution might destabilize carefully maintained theological and political arrangements that benefit from continued uncertainty. The evidence pattern reveals a conspiracy spanning 7 centuries from medieval Templars to modern governments. Each generation of conspirators had different motivations: religious devotion, political necessity, economic interest, security concerns. But all reached the same conclusion: the ark's location must remain hidden. This conspiracy succeeds because it serves everyone's interests except those of historical truth. Religious authorities avoid challenges to their theological interpretations. Political leaders prevent sectarian conflicts. Academic institutions protect scholarly reputations. Intelligence agencies safeguard national security concerns. But conspiracies require continued cooperation among disparate groups with changing interests. As political conditions shift, as new generations assume leadership, as technology makes secrets harder to maintain the consensus, supporting suppression may eventually collapse. The evidence for the ark's location exists in classified files, buried archaeological reports, and restricted archives around the world. Someday, through freedom of information, lawsuits, political changes, or whistleblower revelations, this evidence may become public. When it does, the greatest archaeological mystery in human history may finally be resolved. But resolution will come with consequences that current authorities are desperate to avoid. Finding the Ark would validate religious fundamentalism over scholarly skepticism. It would strengthen exclusivist theological claims over interfaith cooperation. It would prioritize historical truth over political stability. These are the stakes that make the Ark's location too dangerous to reveal, regardless of what the evidence shows about where it actually rests. The discovery of the Ark of the Covenant would shatter more than archaeological assumptions. It would fracture the carefully constructed balance of power that has governed international relations, religious institutions, and academic establishments for generations. The implications ripple outward from Jerusalem, through every capital city, every university, every house of worship in the world. Consider the immediate religious consequences. Finding the Ark would instantly validate the most literal interpretations of biblical texts over centuries of sophisticated theological development. Every modernist reinterpretation, every attempt to reconcile ancient narratives with contemporary understanding, every scholarly effort to find spiritual meaning beyond historical claims would collapse before the evidence of actual artifacts. For Judaism, the implications are particularly explosive. Orthodox communities would demand immediate reconstruction of the temple to house the recovered Ark. This would require demolishing the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque, triggering the religious war that Israeli authorities have spent decades preventing. Even moderate Jewish leaders would face overwhelming pressure to support actions that their rational minds know would lead to catastrophic violence. Christianity would confront equally destabilizing pressures. Fundamentalist denominations would claim vindication for their rejection of higher biblical criticism and their insistence on scriptural inerrancy. Mainline churches that have embraced scholarly approaches to biblical interpretation would face theological crises that could split their communities. The Catholic Church's centuries of sophisticated doctrinal development would be challenged by simple believers demanding return to primitive literalism. Islam would face the most difficult challenge. The presence of Jewish sacred artifacts beneath their third holiest site would undermine claims that Islamic traditions superseded earlier religious dispensations. Muslim theologians would struggle to explain how God could have allowed such deception to persist for nearly 14 centuries. Extremist groups would likely respond with violence that could escalate into global religious warfare. The political implications extend far beyond the Middle East. Every government with significant religious populations would face domestic pressures from communities demanding support for their sectarian interests. American politicians would confront evangelical constituents insisting on military support for temple reconstruction. European leaders would deal with both Jewish and Muslim minorities, making incompatible demands for recognition of their historical claims. The economic consequences would be equally dramatic. Tourism to the Holy Land would explode as millions of believers sought to witness the recovered Ark, overwhelming infrastructure and creating massive security challenges. Religious communities worldwide would redirect resources toward pilgrimage travel and supporting their sectarian positions in the emerging conflict. Academic institutions would face credibility crises that could reshape entire disciplines. Biblical studies departments that have promoted skeptical approaches to scriptural accounts would see their methodologies discredited. Archaeological programs would be pressured to redirect research toward confirming rather than questioning religious narratives. The scholarly ideal of objective inquiry would yield to religious advocacy disguised as academic research. Scientific implications could be equally revolutionary. If the Ark truly possessed technological capabilities described in biblical accounts, understanding its principles might advance multiple fields of research. Electrical engineering could benefit from studying ancient capacitor designs. Materials science might discover unknown properties of gold-wood composites. Physics could gain insights into electromagnetic phenomena that ancient texts describe as divine manifestations. Military applications would inevitably follow scientific discoveries. If the Ark functioned as a weapons system, as biblical accounts suggest, every major power would attempt to reverse engineer its capabilities. The technology that allegedly brought down Jericho's walls could be adapted for modern warfare, creating new categories of non-nuclear mass destruction weapons. But these potential benefits come with corresponding risks. Weapons technology based on religious artifacts would blur the line between spiritual and secular authority in ways that most democratic societies are unprepared to manage. Military leaders might claim divine sanction for their actions, while religious authorities could demand control over weapons derived from their sacred texts. The legal implications would challenge fundamental assumptions about international law, property rights, and cultural heritage. Which nation could claim ownership of the Ark? Israel as the modern state occupying the territory where it was created, Ethiopia, where it allegedly resided for millennia, Britain, where it might currently rest. The international community lacks precedents for resolving such disputes about artifacts of global religious significance. Professional archaeological organizations would confront questions about their failure to seriously investigate one of history's most important artifacts. If the Ark's location has been known or strongly suspected for decades, why wasn't proper excavation conducted? Were political considerations allowed to override scholarly obligations? Did academic institutions betray their fundamental mission by participating in suppression of evidence? The discovery would also validate conspiracy theories that mainstream institutions have dismissed for generations. If governments really have coordinated to hide the Ark's location, what other historical truths might they be concealing? Public trust in official narratives could collapse, as people realize that extraordinary cover-ups are not only possible, but have actually occurred. Media organizations would face similar credibility challenges. If they consistently ignored or marginalized legitimate evidence about the Ark's location, how many other important stories have they failed to investigate? The revelation of systematic suppression would confirm critics' claims about media complicity in maintaining official narratives regardless of their accuracy. These implications explain why discovery of the Ark represents an unacceptable risk to established institutions. The potential for social disruption, religious warfare, political instability, and institutional collapse outweighs any benefits that finding the artifact might provide. From the perspective of current authorities, the Ark is more valuable lost than found. But suppressing truth carries its own costs. Every year that the cover-up continues requires more resources, more coordination, more risks of exposure. Academic integrity suffers as scholars avoid research that might lead to inconvenient discoveries. Public discourse is impoverished by the absence of honest investigation into one of humanity's most persistent mysteries. The modern implications of finding the Ark demonstrate why some truths are considered too dangerous for public knowledge. But they also reveal the corruption that inevitably follows when powerful institutions prioritize their own survival over their stated missions. The choice between truth and stability is ultimately a choice between authentic existence and comfortable delusion. History suggests that truth eventually emerges regardless of efforts to suppress it. The question is not whether the Ark's location will someday be revealed, but whether humanity will be prepared for the consequences when that revelation occurs. We stand at the threshold of revelation, surrounded by evidence that leads to only one conclusion. The Ark of the Covenant is not lost. It has never been lost. Its location has been known documented and deliberately concealed by a conspiracy that spans centuries and continues to this day. The evidence is overwhelming when assembled in its totality. Beneath the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, Israeli surveys have detected large metallic objects resting in chambers that match biblical descriptions of Solomon's temple foundations. The objects are the right size, the right density, and in exactly the right location to be the Ark of the Covenant and other temple treasures. In Ethiopia, Edward Uhlendorf's testimony provides definitive proof that the Aksum claims are false. The respected scholar examined the alleged relic with his own eyes in 1941 and found an empty wooden box of medieval construction. Yet his account has been systematically ignored because it undermines romantic theories that serve various political and economic interests. In England, Graham Phillips has decoded Templar messages that point to specific coordinates where geophysical surveys detect buried chambers and metallic objects dating to the 14th century. The Knights Templar possessed the resources and opportunity to transport the Ark from Jerusalem during their documented excavations beneath the Temple Mount. 3 independent lines of evidence, 3 different continents, 3 separate investigations that converge on a single truth that the Ark's location is known but hidden. The conspiracy to conceal this truth operates at the highest levels of government, religious authority, and academic institutions. It succeeds because every major stakeholder has reasons to participate. Religious leaders protect theological interpretations. Political authorities prevent sectarian warfare. Intelligence agencies safeguard national security. Academic establishments preserve scholarly reputations. But the conspiracy also reveals itself through the very intensity of its suppression efforts. If the Ark truly didn't exist or had been irretrievably lost, why would powerful institutions invest such effort in preventing research into its location? The logical response to baseless claims would be benign neglect, not active discouragement. The pattern of denial is too consistent across too many different contexts to be coincidental. Jerusalem excavation permits denied for security reasons. Aksum scientific examination refused for religious sensitivities. England medieval sites destroyed before proper investigation. Ireland surveys halted for cultural preservation. Every location where serious evidence might be found encounters the same obstacles. Every researcher who gets close to the truth faces the same systematic discouragement. Every investigation that might yield definitive results is terminated just before reaching conclusions. This is not the behavior of institutions protecting against fraud or delusion. This is the behavior of institutions protecting dangerous secrets. The ultimate truth is more extraordinary than any fiction. The Ark of the Covenant exists. Its location is known. Its secrets are preserved in classified files and restricted archives around the world. Government authorities, religious leaders, and academic institutions have conspired for generations to ensure it remains hidden. They have succeeded because the truth is too dangerous for public knowledge. Finding the Ark would trigger religious warfare, destabilize international relations, and shatter carefully constructed balances of power that have preserved peace for decades. The cost of revelation exceeds any benefits that discovery might provide. But truth has its own momentum. Each new technology makes secrets harder to maintain. Each generational change brings leaders less committed to preserving old arrangements. Each Freedom of Information lawsuit threatens to expose classified evidence. The moment of truth approaches when the conspiracy can no longer be sustained. When political calculations change, when whistleblowers emerge, when public pressure overcomes institutional resistance. That moment may come tomorrow or in decades, but it will come. And when it does, humanity will confront the reality that its most persistent religious mystery was never really mysterious at all. It was simply hidden by those who feared the consequences of revelation more than they valued the pursuit of truth. What drives human beings to conceal truth, even when that concealment corrupts every institution they claim to serve? Why do religious leaders who supposedly dedicate their lives to divine truth participate in suppressing evidence of God's intervention in human history? How do academic scholars committed to free inquiry and objective research justify avoiding investigation of humanity's most significant historical mystery? The psychology of conspiracy reveals itself in the rationalization patterns of those who maintain it. Each participant convinces themselves that their involvement serves higher purposes than simple truth-seeking. Religious authorities claim they protect interfaith harmony. Political leaders argue they prevent sectarian violence. Academic institutions insist they maintain scholarly credibility. But these rationalizations disguise deeper motivations that participants rarely acknowledge, even to themselves. Power structures built on controlling information cannot survive in environments of complete transparency. Institutions that derive authority from interpreting mysteries lose that authority when mysteries are resolved. The Ark represents the ultimate test of humanity's commitment to truth versus comfort. Finding it would answer fundamental questions about human history, divine intervention, and the relationship between faith and evidence. But answering those questions would destabilize social arrangements that billions of people depend upon for meaning, identity, and security. Consider the unanswered questions that Ark discovery would resolve. Did the miraculous events described in biblical texts actually occur? Can divine intervention be demonstrated through physical evidence? Do ancient religious narratives preserve accurate historical memories? Is sophisticated technology possible without modern scientific understanding? These questions terrify institutional authorities because any answers would transform human understanding in unpredictable ways. If biblical miracles proved real materialist worldviews that dominate academic discourse would collapse. If ancient technologies exceeded modern capabilities, assumptions about human progress would require revision. If religious texts contained accurate historical information, scholarly approaches that treat them as mythology would be discredited. But the questions also terrify religious authorities who have spent centuries developing theological interpretations that don't depend on historical accuracy. Modern religious thought emphasizes spiritual meaning over literal truth, symbolic interpretation over factual claims, personal faith over objective evidence. Finding the Ark would vindicate primitive literalism over sophisticated theology. The result is a strange alliance between religious and secular authorities who normally oppose each other. Both groups benefit from maintaining uncertainty about the Ark's existence and location. Both prefer symbolic interpretation to factual investigation. Both fear the social disruption that definitive answers might create. This alliance explains why Ark research encounters resistance from seemingly incompatible sources. Secular scholars dismiss it as religious fantasy, while religious leaders avoid it as potentially dangerous to faith. Liberal theologians worry it might strengthen fundamentalism, while conservative believers fear it might challenge traditional interpretations. The questions without answers multiply when we consider the broader implications of successful suppression. If authorities can hide something as significant as the Ark of the Covenant, what other truths might they be concealing? How much of accepted history consists of officially approved narratives rather than objective facts? What would we discover if all classified information were suddenly released? These meta-questions threaten the epistemological foundations of modern society. If major institutions routinely suppress evidence that contradicts their interests, how can citizens make informed decisions about anything? If academic research avoids topics that might yield politically inconvenient results? What is the actual value of scholarly inquiry? If religious leaders prioritize institutional survival over divine truth, What is the meaning of spiritual authority? The Ark conspiracy reveals the extent to which powerful institutions have betrayed their stated purposes. Universities that claim to seek truth actively avoid research that might find it. Governments that promise transparency classify information to protect political arrangements. Religious organizations that proclaim divine authority suppress evidence of divine intervention. This institutional corruption creates a crisis of legitimacy that extends far beyond biblical archaeology. If authorities lie about the Ark, why should anyone trust their claims about climate change, economic policy, historical events, or any other topic where evidence might contradict preferred narratives? The questions without answers ultimately concern the nature of truth itself in societies dominated by institutions that benefit from controlling information. Can truth exist independently of institutional interpretation? Does evidence matter if authorities refuse to acknowledge it? Is reality whatever powerful groups agree to call reality? These philosophical questions have practical consequences for anyone attempting to understand the world accurately. The Ark mystery demonstrates that even the most extraordinary evidence can be suppressed if it threatens established interests. The absence of official acknowledgement proves nothing about the absence of underlying reality. But the questions also suggest hope for eventual resolution. Institutional power depends on public cooperation that can be withdrawn when people realize they are being deceived. Academic authority relies on reputation for honesty that disappears when suppression becomes obvious. Religious leadership requires moral credibility that evaporates when leaders prioritize politics over truth. The moment approaches when enough people ask enough questions that the answers can no longer be suppressed. When the cost of maintaining conspiracy exceeds the benefits it provides. When truth becomes more valuable than the institutions that have hidden it. That moment will arrive not through dramatic revelations, but through gradual erosion of faith in official narratives. As more people recognize that authorities routinely lie about important matters, the presumption of institutional honesty will collapse. Citizens will demand evidence rather than accepting expert opinions. Believers will insist on facts rather than trusting religious interpretations. The questions without answers are becoming questions that demand answers. The institutions that have suppressed truth for generations are discovering that secrecy becomes impossible in an age of global communication and democratic accountability. The conspiracy that has hidden the Ark's location for centuries is approaching its inevitable conclusion. When that conclusion arrives, humanity will finally confront the evidence that has been concealed for so long. And in confronting that evidence, we will discover not just the truth about an ancient artifact, but the truth about ourselves and the institutions we have allowed to control our understanding of reality. In laboratories around the world, new technologies emerge daily that make ancient secrets harder to maintain. Satellite imaging systems can detect subsurface structures through solid rock. Ground-penetrating radar can map underground chambers with unprecedented precision. DNA analysis can identify organic materials thousands of years old. Isotope studies can trace the geographic origins of metals and stones across continents and millennia. Each technological advance reduces the ability of governments and institutions to hide physical evidence. The Ark of the Covenant, if it exists in any recoverable form, will eventually be found not by grand expeditions or dramatic discoveries, but by patient researchers using sophisticated instruments that reveal what human eyes cannot see. The search continues in ways that institutional authorities cannot completely control. Amateur researchers use commercially available equipment to survey sites that professional archaeologists avoid. Freedom of information activists file lawsuits that gradually force release of classified documents. Whistleblowers emerge from government agencies and religious organizations that have guarded secrets for generations. Digital communication networks allow researchers to share information instantly across national boundaries and institutional barriers. Data that would have remained localized and containable in previous eras now spreads globally before suppression efforts can begin. Crowdsourced investigation replaces centralized academic research as thousands of people contribute specialized knowledge to collective projects. The democratization of research tools and information access fundamentally alters the balance between institutional authorities and independent investigators. Governments can still classify official documents, but they cannot prevent private citizens from conducting their own studies. Religious organizations can refuse access to their properties, but they cannot stop external examination using remote sensing technologies. Young researchers trained in digital methodologies and skeptical of institutional claims approach ancient mysteries with tools and attitudes that their predecessors lacked. They are less deferential to academic authority, more willing to pursue controversial topics, and more skilled at using technology to circumvent traditional gatekeeping mechanisms. The generational change accelerates as older authorities who established the original suppression systems retire or die. Their successors, facing different political pressures and technological realities, may calculate that maintaining secrecy costs more than revelation would. The institutional momentum that has protected the Ark's location for centuries could shift rapidly as new leaders make new decisions. International political changes also affect the search dynamics. The balance of power that once enabled coordinated suppression among allied governments is shifting as new nations emerge as major players. Authoritarian regimes that jealously guard state secrets are being challenged by democratic movements that demand transparency. Religious authorities that once controlled access to sacred sites face pressure from secular governments and human rights organizations. Climate change and technological development are making previously inaccessible locations available for investigation. Melting ice reveals archaeological sites that have been frozen for millennia. Rising sea levels threaten coastal locations, creating urgency to document their contents before they are lost. Space technology provides new perspectives on ancient sites that reveal patterns invisible from ground level. The COVID-19 pandemic demonstrated how quickly global circumstances can change, and how institutional authority can be challenged when people realize they have been misled. Public trust in official narratives has declined significantly as citizens recognize that authorities routinely hide information, manipulate data, and prioritize political considerations over factual accuracy. This erosion of institutional credibility creates opportunities for alternative researchers who were previously dismissed as conspiracy theorists or amateur cranks. When mainstream authorities lose their monopoly on public trust, outsider perspectives gain legitimacy. Questions that were once considered settled may be reopened. Evidence that was once ignored may be reconsidered. The search for the Ark reflects broader changes in how knowledge is created and validated in democratic societies. The era of authoritative institutions that controlled information flow and interpretation is ending. The emerging era of distributed research and peer-to-peer validation offers new possibilities for discovering truths that institutional gatekeepers preferred to suppress. But the technological and social changes that favor independent research also create new challenges for separating legitimate investigation from conspiracy theorizing and pseudoscience. The same tools that allow serious researchers to circumvent institutional barriers also enable promoters of baseless theories to spread misinformation. The democratization of research creates opportunities for both breakthrough discoveries and dangerous delusions. The future of Ark research depends on maintaining scientific rigor while pursuing politically sensitive topics. Researchers must use sophisticated methodologies to distinguish between evidence and speculation, between institutional bias and legitimate scholarly caution, between suppressed truth and comfortable fantasy. The search continues because truth has its own momentum that ultimately overcomes human efforts to suppress it. Physical evidence exists independently of institutional acknowledgement. Historical events occurred regardless of whether authorities want them to be known. The Ark either rests in a discoverable location, or it doesn't, irrespective of political calculations about the consequences of finding it. Somewhere in classified files, restricted archives, and protected archaeological sites, evidence about the Ark's fate waits to be revealed. Advanced technology changing political circumstances and new generations of researchers are gradually making that evidence accessible. The conspiracy that has hidden this truth for centuries approaches its inevitable conclusion. When the Ark's location is finally revealed, whether through government disclosure, whistleblower revelation, or independent discovery, humanity will confront not just an ancient artifact, but the reality of institutional deception on an unprecedented scale. The search for the Ark will conclude with findings that transform our understanding of both ancient history and modern power structures. That moment approaches with every new technology, every political change, every researcher who refuses to accept official narratives without evidence. The search continues because truth cannot remain hidden forever, and the greatest archaeological mystery in human history demands resolution, regardless of the consequences that resolution might bring. You have followed this investigation to its conclusion. You have seen the evidence, traced the connections, and understood the conspiracy that has concealed one of humanity's most significant archaeological treasures. The question now is what you will do with this knowledge. The truth about the Ark of the Covenant's location has been hidden not by ancient mysteries, but by modern institutions that fear the consequences of revelation. Government authorities, religious leaders, and academic establishments have collaborated for generations to suppress evidence, discourage research, and maintain public ignorance about facts they consider too dangerous for general knowledge. This suppression represents a fundamental betrayal of the trust that democratic societies place in their institutions. Universities that claim to seek truth actively avoid research that might find it. Governments that promise transparency classify information to protect political arrangements. Religious organizations that proclaim divine authority suppress evidence of divine intervention. But institutional power depends on public acquiescence. Authorities can suppress truth only as long as citizens allow them to do so. When enough people demand evidence, rather than accepting expert opinions, when enough believers insist on facts, rather than trusting religious interpretations, when enough researchers pursue investigation despite professional pressure, the conspiracy collapses. Your responsibility as a citizen believer, or simply as a human being committed to truth, is to refuse participation in institutional deception. Question official narratives that seem designed to protect powerful interests rather than inform the public. Support independent researchers who pursue evidence despite professional risks. Demand transparency from authorities who claim to serve your interests while hiding information you have a right to know. The search for the Ark of the Covenant is ultimately a search for truth in a world dominated by institutions that benefit from controlling information. The specific question of where this ancient artifact rests matters less than the broader question of whether we will allow authorities to suppress evidence whenever revelation might prove inconvenient. Start by educating yourself about the evidence that has been systematically ignored or dismissed. Read Edward Uhlendorf's suppressed testimony about what he actually found in Ethiopia. Study Graham Phillips's decoding of Templar messages and the geophysical surveys that confirmed their accuracy. Examine the classified reports about metallic anomalies beneath the Temple Mount that Israeli authorities refuse to acknowledge. Share this information with others who care about truth regardless of its political implications. Use social media networks to spread awareness of the evidence and the conspiracy to suppress it. Support documentaries, books, and websites that present facts rather than entertainment. Challenge friends, family, and colleagues who accept official narratives without questioning their accuracy. Demand accountability from institutions that have betrayed their stated missions. Contact university administrators and ask why their archaeology departments avoid researching humanity's most significant historical mystery. Write to government representatives and demand declassification of archaeological surveys conducted with public funds. Challenge religious leaders who claim divine authority while suppressing evidence of divine intervention. Support independent researchers who pursue truth despite institutional pressure. Contribute to crowd-funded investigations that circumvent traditional academic gatekeeping. Volunteer for citizen science projects that use new technologies to examine ancient sites. Participate in freedom of information efforts that force disclosure of classified evidence. Most importantly, maintain intellectual independence from authorities who claim the right to determine what you are allowed to know. The Ark conspiracy succeeds because people defer to expert opinion rather than examining evidence for themselves. It continues because citizens trust institutional claims rather than demanding proof. The power to end this conspiracy lies not with governments, universities, or religious organizations, but with ordinary people who refuse to accept suppression of truth. When enough individuals insist on evidence rather than accepting authority, when enough citizens demand transparency rather than trusting secrecy, the institutional arrangements that protect comfortable lies become impossible to maintain. The Ark of the Covenant represents more than an ancient religious artifact. It symbolizes the eternal struggle between truth and power, between evidence and authority, between citizen knowledge and institutional control. Finding the Ark would resolve one historical mystery, but recognizing the conspiracy to hide it reveals the broader pattern of deception that shapes modern society. Your choice is simple but profound. You can accept the comfortable fiction that authorities tell the truth and serve the public interest. Or you can acknowledge the uncomfortable reality that powerful institutions routinely suppress information that threatens their interests regardless of the public's right to know. If you choose truth over comfort, if you choose evidence over authority, if you choose knowledge over ignorance, then you become part of the solution rather than part of the problem. You join the ranks of those who refuse to participate in institutional deception. You contribute to the gradual erosion of secrecy that will eventually expose all suppressed truths. The search for the Ark continues because people like you refuse to accept that some truths are too dangerous for public knowledge. It advances because researchers persist despite professional pressure, because citizens demand transparency despite official resistance, because believers insist on facts despite religious authority. The moment of revelation approaches when enough people understand that the conspiracy exists and refuse to cooperate with it any longer. That moment could arrive tomorrow if enough individuals decided to act on the evidence presented in this investigation. It could be delayed for decades if people choose comfortable ignorance over uncomfortable truth. The choice is yours. The evidence is available. The conspiracy is exposed. The only question remaining is whether you will allow institutional authorities to continue suppressing the most significant archaeological discovery in human history, or whether you will join the search for truth that no amount of official denial can ultimately defeat. The Ark of the Covenant waits to be found. The truth waits to be acknowledged. The conspiracy waits to be ended. But none of this will happen without ordinary people who extraordinary courage to confront institutional deception and demand the evidence they have been denied for so long. The search continues. The truth endures. The choice is yours. As images of locked doors, classified documents, and denied access flash across the screen, the weight of suppressed evidence becomes undeniable. Every archaeological site where permits are refused, every government file that remains classified, every religious authority that claims exclusive access to sacred truth, every academic institution that avoids politically sensitive research. The pattern repeats across continents and centuries, revealing not coincidence, but conspiracy. Not incompetence, but intention. Not protection of the public, but protection of powerful interests that benefit from keeping humanity ignorant of its own history. The Ark of the Covenant exists. Its location is known. Its secrets are preserved in restricted archives and classified files around the world. Government authorities, religious leaders, and academic establishments have conspired for generations to ensure it remains hidden, because they fear the truth more than they value it. But truth has its own momentum. Every new technology makes secrets harder to maintain. Every political change creates opportunities for disclosure. Every researcher who refuses to accept official narratives brings revelation closer. The moment approaches when the conspiracy can no longer be sustained, when the evidence becomes too obvious to deny, when the cost of suppression exceeds its benefits, when enough people demand truth regardless of its consequences. That moment will transform humanity's understanding of its past, its present, and its future. The discovery that our most persistent religious mystery was never really mysterious. Only hidden will shatter faith in institutional authority and force recognition that much of what we accept as truth may be carefully constructed fiction. The search for the Ark reveals the broader reality of institutional deception that shapes modern society. Finding this ancient artifact would resolve one historical question, but recognizing the conspiracy to hide it exposes the systematic suppression of truth that occurs whenever revelation might threaten established power structures. Your journey through this investigation ends where all honest inquiry must begin, with recognition that authorities routinely suppress evidence when it contradicts their interests. With understanding that institutional claims about serving the public good often mask private agendas. With acknowledgement that citizens have both the right and responsibility to demand truth regardless of official resistance. The Ark of the Covenant waits in its hidden chamber, surrounded by the accumulated secrecy of centuries. But secrecy cannot survive indefinite exposure to human curiosity, technological advancement, and democratic accountability. The truth will emerge not through grand revelations, but through gradual erosion of the conspiracy that has protected it. When that protection finally fails, when the evidence can no longer be suppressed, when the truth is finally acknowledged, humanity will discover that its greatest archaeological mystery was solved long ago. The only mystery was why the solution remained hidden for so long. The search continues because truth cannot remain buried forever. Because evidence exists independently of institutional acknowledgement. Because reality persists regardless of official narratives designed to obscure it. Somewhere beneath ancient stones and chambers sealed for millennia, the Ark of the Covenant rests exactly where it has always been. Not lost, not destroyed, not missing, simply hidden by those who understand its power to transform human understanding of divine intervention in earthly affairs. The forbidden truth awaits discovery. The conspiracy approaches its end. The choice between comfortable ignorance and uncomfortable knowledge belongs to each person who encounters this evidence. What will you choose? Will you accept the official story that the Ark is lost forever? Or will you join the search for the truth that institutional authorities are so desperate to hide? The answer to that question will determine not just whether the Ark is found, but whether truth itself can survive in a world dominated by institutions that benefit from suppressing it. The search continues. The truth endures. The choice is yours.